What's up guys, patch 12.13 is out, and I want to help all Viego mains know which matchups are hardest to easiest, so I'm going to create a tier list that basically just goes over all the matchups in jungle for League of Legends in patch 12.13. Now this tier list I didn't actually make, so there are some champs in here that I wouldn't really consider junglers like Set, Cho'Gath, Mundo, so I'll just basically put those in Freelo since they're not really jungle. But regardless, let's get into the first champion, which is Amumu. So Amumu is honestly just really a low elo champion. He's not really played anywhere in high elo except maybe support randomly sometimes. Amumu does actually have some natural counters against Viego, given that his E reduces auto attack damage and he has a lot of CC. But outside of that, Amumu gets hard outscaled. Amumu can't really ever duel Viego. So I would say it is an easy but not free win matchup for Viego. Now Cho'Gath, he is not a jungler, but he is a champion that actually has a lot of counters for Viego. The silence is the big one. I will still put him in Freelo though, because honestly, if it's a Cho'Gath jungle, he's not really going to be a problem. And Mundo is kind of the same way. Although Mundo's actually a better jungler than he gets credit for. Mundo actually still has one of the fastest clears in the game if you do it properly. So I would say that honestly, Mundo would be higher than Amumu. The reason that Mundo is higher than Amumu is because Mundo, as a champion in general, is kind of difficult for Viego. He has a ton of survivability and healing, and until you have at least like 3 items like Death Stance, Bork, Black Cleaver, it's almost impossible to face Mundo unless you're super far ahead. So I'm gonna put Mundo in easy because most people don't play Mundo jungle, and if you are playing Mundo jungle, it's usually not that big of a problem, but he's still a little bit harder than Amumu, in my opinion. Alright, Echo. I guess, honestly, we're starting off, most of these champions are pretty easy for Viego. I think that Echo used to be a bigger problem, but with Death Stance Maw being so easily itemized, Echo just is not very good in the meta in general, and specifically against Viego, despite the fact that he has a lot of mobility. There's not much he can do at a certain point once you build these items. I will say that he is definitely a better jungler than Mundo and Amumu, but he's still just he's not strong enough to where he is like an even matchup like he used to be, especially given just like, I mean, you just build Death Stance Maw and he can't do anything to you specifically. Alright, Elise. Now, I think that Elise is a really hard champion to rank because Elise is really only played in high-low effectively and also only really played by one-tricks. I will say that I think Elise is a difficult matchup because Elise is really good where Viego isn't good, which is in the early game. Elise, her gank pressure and tower dive potential is basically unmatched by most junglers, especially Viego, whose early game is a lot weaker now than it used to be. So I think Elise, despite the fact that she falls off and Viego does outscale her, her early game potential makes this a really even matchup. Basically how this matchup goes, you either survive her early game and outscale her, or she just beats you before you get to play. That's basically how this matchup goes. Alright, Evelyn. Evelyn is basically the same level of difficulty as Echo, except I think Echo is a little bit more dynamic of a champion and can actually do a little bit more than Evelyn. Basically, the issues are the exact same. You build Death Stance Maw, Echo, Evelyn, they can't one-shot you. If they can't one-shot you, there's not much they can do. Evelyn doesn't have a great early game. She can't really do much till level 6. Obviously, everybody knows that once Evelyn hits level 6, she turns invisible and can just completely destroy your team before you can really punish her. However, in most cases, I feel like you should be able to beat Evelyn and outscale her with Death Stance Maw. So I think that Echo and Evelyn are pretty similar in that regard. Fiddlesticks, I actually will say that Fiddlesticks is one of the champions that I would consider banning this patch. As some of you may know, Fiddlesticks did get some pretty significant buffs on 12.13, but Fiddlesticks has always been kind of an underrated jungler. I think a lot of people don't like playing him because he's kind of clunky to play, and he has what people would consider a very exploitable weakness, which is he relies on a lack of vision from the enemy team. However, Fiddlesticks against Viego specifically has an insane amount of CC, and pretty much just as a champion in general, just counters everything that Viego wants to do. Unless you can manage to find out where Fiddlesticks is and flank him and get a pick on him, Fiddles is just going to control the entire game and make it very difficult to play. I think Fiddlesticks is probably one of the best junglers on the patch, and if people aren't playing him, it's just because they don't want to or they don't know how to. Because Fiddlesticks is actually kind of nuanced as a champion, but I can't play against him. I hate playing against him. I think he's an impossible matchup, honestly. Alright, Graves. Now, Graves is always going to be a hard matchup because Graves is always going to be a hard matchup because of the way he is. The fact that he gets so much free armor from his E, the fact that he has a dash to dodge Viego's stun, his invading, his dueling potential, his clear speed, it's all insane. The thing is that Graves just isn't actually that strong of a champion on his own. He's just a strong champion versus Viego specifically. So because of that, I'm going to put him in an even matchup, although in many other patches for many other seasons, I would have put him either hard or impossible. This is probably the easiest this matchup has ever been for Viego versus Graves, and so that is why I'm going to put him in even right now, but I still despise this champion, and that's just all there is to it, really. Alright, Hecarim. Now, Hecarim is a pretty easy matchup. I would say he's harder than Evelyn and Echo, but not by much. Really, Hecarim's not a very strong champion right now. He's been nerfed an absolute shit ton. But the way this matchup usually goes is Hecarim controls the early game, Viego outscales him at 2 items. That's how it goes. So, really, what it comes down to is, can you prevent Hecarim from running over the game in the early game? And if you can, then you're going to outscale him. Another thing is that Hecarim's very susceptible to being invaded. He usually full clears, and usually full clears at low HP, so if you can manage to kill him, maybe while he's doing Gromp and blue buff at the same time, that's a huge way to beat him. But yeah, I would say that Hecarim is a pretty easy matchup. Alright, Ivern is also a champion that's kind of hard to rank, because Ivern alone is not the greatest threat, but Ivern in a double enchanter comp, like if you pair Ivern plus Soraka, or like Ivern plus Seraphine or something, he becomes basically unplayable to play against. Viego does not itemize Serpent's Fang very well. In fact, I think in my entire time of playing Viego, I've maybe bought Serpent's Fang like 3 times. So versus Ivern, I would say that it's generally an even matchup, because Ivern himself doesn't really do very well versus Viego. Viego can outscale him, he can duel him, he can do all these things, but in a team fight scenario, or like a team comp scenario where Ivern is paired with other enchanters, enchanters are Viego's like biggest counter. It makes it incredibly hard to play Viego versus double enchanters, so Ivern kind of does play a factor into that depending on the team comp, so I would put him in even. Alright, Jarvan. I would say that Jarvan is basically in the exact same position as Elise. Jarvan controls the early game. It's really hard to match up with Jarvan's pressure. Basically, Viego outscales, but you lose early, so that it's basically the exact same as Elise. A lot of champions are like this. Basically, any early game champion is going to be an even matchup, because while you do outscale them, they have the potential to beat you early. So it's never going to be like you're going to lose 100% of the time to an early game champion, because obviously the early game doesn't always go to plan for these types of junglers. But if it does go to plan, they will beat you before you even get to play. If they don't do well, then you'll beat them in the mid to late game. So that's how Jarvan and Elise function. Alright, so Jax isn't really a jungler, but he is one of Viego's biggest counters because, as you know, as you might know or might not know, Viego's ult does count as an auto attack, which means it's blocked by Jax's counter strike, which basically means that Jax has the ability to dodge almost every single one of your abilities, or at least reduce the damage of every single one of your abilities. So Jax is inherently a pretty strong champion, and I think specifically against Viego, Jax jungle could be picked in a sort of viable way. I'm going to put it in an even matchup because, I mean, if you're asking me how I feel about Jax top, I would say that Jax top would be like hard or impossible like to face, but obviously this is a jungle tier list, so Jax jungle isn't that great on his own, but I will put him in even just because I have to give respect to Jax given his ability to counter Viego. Karthus, I would say that Karthus is an interesting champion. I will put him in even because while Karthus has some of the best scaling in the game, has insane team fighting, and all these things cause a lot of problems for Viego, the reality is that if you're good enough, you should be able to lock Karthus out of the game, because Karthus can't really do anything versus your invades, and if you get a lead over Karthus in the early game, which you should, you pretty much can just run over him the entire game. You can build Death Stance Maw versus Karthus. You can also unironically build Zhonya's. I know Zhonya's is kind of an underrated tech on Viego, but you can build Zhonya's, and that counters Karthus. So this matchup is even because you should be able to punish Karthus, but if you can't, he will outscale you and beat you. This is one of the scenarios where you're actually the one with the advantage in the early game. So Karthus, he's just like a pure even matchup. There's just nothing else to say about it. You can win, but it really just comes down to how well you play. Now, Kayn is getting nerfed next patch, but this patch, he is not getting nerfed, or he is not nerfed, which means he is still hard. In my personal opinion, I just think Kayn is one of the most infuriating champions on planet Earth to play against. However, I will say that I much prefer playing against red Kayn meta than blue Kayn meta. Blue Kayn is just the most diabolical champ of all time. So I like that at least Kayn is being played red right now, because that means that it's a little bit easier and less frustrating. But Kayn is still very strong. He can outfarm you, or yeah, he can outfarm you. Once he gets red, it's very difficult to beat him unless you're already fed. But I will say that because of the way Kayn is, his early game is so bad that you can always get a lead over him, usually if you play it correctly, and that's why Kayn is not an impossible matchup, but he is still a hard one. Alright, Kha'zix. I would say that Kha'zix is probably a little bit on the easier end of things, but probably the hardest of the easy matchups. The main reason is just because it's so easy to itemize versus Kha'zix. You go like Divine Sunder Death Stance, or even Kraken Slayer Death Stance, and you just nullify so much of his kit. The main annoying factor about Kha'zix is his invisibility. It's really hard to play against most invisible champions. However, I will say that that Kha'zix has a lot of problems as a champion himself. Most assassins aren't very good right now. Lethality is not great. His clear speed is pretty slow, and if he doesn't get a lead over you, there's not much he can do. Especially if you're really far ahead and you get to Death Stance before he can even really itemize anything. I would say that Kha'zix can't really do much versus Viego. However, with assassins, there's always the chance that they just pick up a triple kill bot lane somehow and just carry the game through that. So you can never fully underestimate assassins, especially ones that can go invisible. Okay, Kindred. I get PTSD just thinking about it because this champion is, in my humble opinion, the absolute 100% undisputed hardest champion in the game for Viego to play against. I don't even think it's close. I personally ban Yuumi every game because I think Yuumi is the most infuriating champion to play against as a jungler, but if I had some sense to me and I was forced to ban a jungler every game, it would be Kindred. There are so many reasons why Kindred is broken. She beats you in every stage of the game. Her ultimate counters you because it helps her, it allows her to deny possessions, or she can just like completely counter your ult. Against a good Kindred, it's literally almost impossible to touch her. She should be able to dodge every one of your spells. The only way you can even get on her is by flashing on her. If she has flash, there's just nothing you can do. She can invade you, she can pressure you, and there's not a goddamn thing you can do about it. Kindred is the most broken champion versus Viego of all of them. And, you know, it's just, that's just how it is. She is the one jungler that I fear and dread seeing the most when I lock in Viego. So that's that. And the reason I'm not going to talk more about it is because if I do, I'm going to cry. So, yeah, Kindred is, I'm not going to talk any more about her. Alright, Lee Sin is the ultimate skill matchup. Lee Sin isn't in the greatest spot right now, but the thing about Lee Sin is that no matter what spot he's in, if the player is talented enough at Lee Sin, he will always be a problem. This is probably the matchup that I've played by far the most because Lee Sin is, you know, just like one of the most popular champions in the game, and especially in higher ranks, people love playing Lee Sin. Lee Sin is a champion that he's one of those early game champions that you outscale, but Lee Sin just has so many methods and ways to outplay you, but so does Viego, because for example, if Lee Sin goes to ult you, you can Viego ult and become unstoppable and counter the ult that way. You know, like you can always dodge Lee Sin's Q, and there's a lot of ways to beat for Lee Sin to beat Viego and for Viego to beat Lee Sin, and it's probably one of my favorite matchups in the game ever to play because it's just a ton of fun. Plus, I find Lee Sin really fun to possess, so if I get to kill him, then that makes me very happy. So yeah, I would say that Lee Sin probably the top skill matchup in the game, one of the most fun matchups as well. All right, Lilia, I would actually put Lilia a little bit below Kindred and Fiddlesticks, but I think she's still a relatively impossible matchup. The main reason why she's an impossible matchup is because Lilia has the potential to, if a good Lilia versus Viego will build Zhonya's and Frozen Heart, which basically just makes Viego just a terrible champ. But she is too fast for Viego, so it should be almost impossible for Viego to hit his W on a Lilia. And because of that, I mean, like, on Viego, if you're versus a champion that you just can't hit, there's nothing you can do to them. A good Lilia should have full control of this matchup. She should be able to outfarm, outpace, and out-teamfight a Viego in most scenarios. In order to beat Lilia, you just kind of have to hope that you get fed enough to the point where somebody else can deal with Lilia and you can carry the team fights, because you as Viego will not be able to deal with Lilia. And most champions that can build Zhonya's are just inherently a counter to Viego, just because Zhonya's is such a huge counter to Viego's ultimate. But yeah, I would say that Lilia isn't as crazy as Fiddlesticks and Kindred, but is still definitely an impossible matchup. Alright, I don't consider Malphite a jungler. Master Yi I will put in hard, because this champion got extraordinarily overbuffed. He went from what, like a 46% win rate to like a 54% win rate, like almost like a 10% win rate increase, which might be like one of the biggest win rate increases I think we've ever seen in League of Legends history. However, the thing is I still play in like a higher rank, and Master Yi's problems do still exist, where if you have the right team comp, Master Yi struggles a lot. If you have a lot of CC, on-demand CC, if you have multiple enchanters, something like that, Master Yi struggles a ton, but in a pure 1v1, even items, Master Yi will pretty much always beat Viego. I the other day I was like 15-2 on Viego, had an entire item up on Master Yi, and he just straight up ran at me. I hit every single spell, and he just melted me before I could do anything. It was a shocking but enlightening moment, which made me realize that Master Yi, against Viego specifically, is kind of broken. But then again, he might just be broken in general, given the fact that he went up almost 10% win rate. So I would say that that Master Yi and Kane are honestly pretty close. You could even swap them around, but I would say that yeah, Master Yi is definitely up there in the broken department. And Nasus, I don't even know why he's there. He's not even close to being a jungler, so that's where I'm gonna put him. Nidalee. All right, Nidalee. Like 99% of players should never pick Nidalee. She's probably one of the hardest champs in the game. You could even make the argument she is the hardest, but you know, that's up for debate. However, I feel bad putting Nidalee in Freelo because there are people who can play Nidalee at an extraordinarily high level, and she becomes a very valuable champion. So I'm gonna put her a little bit below Evelyn and Echo. The thing is like if I was versus like Yankos on Nidalee or something, like or like Canyon or just someone really good at Nidalee, I would put her, you know, I'd probably put her more like an even or hard matchups. But the reality is that 99% of the people that click Nidalee and lock her in will not ever be able to bring out even close to the maximum potential of the champion. And it's very easy to itemize versus Nidalee. You build Death Stance Maw just like all the other AP champions, and you generally can outscale and survive her. I would say that putting her in easy is probably the most justifiable place to put her, but you can never fully discount Nidalee, especially when in the right hands. So Nocturne. Nocturne is actually a pretty irritating matchup for Viego. I would put him maybe a little bit above Elise and Jarvan. Now, Nocturne isn't really played much in higher ranks because he's pretty one-dimensional. However, Viego struggles really hard versus him because Nocturne just has a point-and-click CC that Viego can't really get away from. And because of that, Viego can't really ever 1v1 Nocturne either, especially if Nocturne spell shields Viego's stun or ultimate. There's not really enough damage that Viego can build unless you're super far ahead to beat Nocturne 1v1. And then Nocturne also can just save his ult for you when you go in on a team fight, and then lock you down with his fear and pretty much destroy you in team fights. However, like I said, he is a very one-dimensional champion, so it's like give or take. So I think because he's a super one-dimensional champion, he has the ability to destroy you, but you can also find ways to outplay him. So that's why Nocturne is an even matchup. Nunu, I would say he is actually a pretty hard matchup. The reason why I think Nunu is hard is because his gank potential is one of the best in the entire game. It's very, very frustrating to play against Nunu, especially if your teammates don't actually listen to your pings, which they rarely do. Where Nunu, he basically just, he's got the best ganks of any tank, and it's not until 2 or 3 items that you actually outscale him. And so what it really comes down to with Nunu is you just have to hope and pray that you can survive the early game long enough to scale, but there's not really much you can do about it. Nunu's very hard to punish, and he's very, very strong in the early game and the mid game as well, actually. So I would say he's basically just a better version of Elise and Jarvan in terms of the early game, and because of that, it's really hard to to beat him, but you do outscale him, just like you do most champions in the jungle. Viego outscales most champions in the jungle. Alright, Olaf. Right now, I don't think Olaf is very good, but he does have problems for Viego, or give problems to Viego, and the reason why he gives problems to Viego is because Olaf's entire MO is he handshakes fights with people. He just waits for champions to go in on him in melee range, and he basically just out stats them. He just stat checks them, and basically if you're gonna go in on Olaf, you need to do it with your teammates because you're never gonna be able to 1v1 him straight up. And if you dash into Olaf, he's just gonna pop his ult and he's just gonna turn and out damage you. However, Olaf is another champion that's extremely one-dimensional, arguably maybe the most one-dimensional champion in the game. He has one move, and that's to run at you. So if you can be patient versus him and wait for your teammates to be around to help you kill him, Olaf is a champion that shouldn't be the greatest problem, but it is a pretty even matchup because there are very clear strengths and weaknesses that both people can exploit. Pantheon, I don't really consider him a jungler, but he, yeah, I would say if he is played jungle, it's pretty free low. Kiana. Now, Kiana's actually getting some jungle buffs next patch, so maybe this will be a revised position going into patch 12.14. But on this patch, I would say that she's pretty similar to Kha'zix. Kiana is extremely infuriating to play against, one of my least favorite champions in the game. Her mobility and invisibility is just despicable to play against. However, in the jungle in particular, she's not very good. Her clear speed is pretty bad. Her sustain in the jungle is pretty bad. She's very easy to invade, and unless she just gets a ton of kills by doing the Do and B hack of just like insane, crazy mechanics, and there's not really much Kiana can do versus Viego, especially once you get Death Stance. I think Kiana is a pretty easy matchup, but obviously is one of those champs that in the right hands can always be a problem. Rammus, I would say that Rammus is pretty similar to Nunu. In fact, I would make the argument that Rammus and Nunu are almost the exact same champion in the ways that they're played. I would say that Nunu is a little bit better and a little bit more dynamic, although Rammus, he is just so good versus Viego. If Rammus really wanted to ruin your life, he could. He could just sit there and wait for you to go in, taunt you, knock you up, and just basically make your life unplayable, or make the game unplayable for you. Building Bramble and armor, like Frozen Heart, and all the things that he can potentially itemize just makes playing against Rammus extremely irritating. Although I will say that once you get, if you're versus Rammus and you go Bork, Divine Sunder, Black Cleaver, you will actually eventually outscale Rammus and be able to shred through Rammus pretty well. Just like most tanks, Viego actually has the ability to outscale almost every tank in the game with itemization. But yeah, Rammus is a problem, and is one of those champs that is just very frustrating to play against. Rengar. I will actually say that Rengar is a champion that people just consistently overlook, but I think he is probably one of the most impossible matchups in the game for Viego. For one, Rengar can basically heal back all the burst damage you deal to him, which is a huge deal given the fact that Viego usually needs to 1 or 2 combo the people that he's trying to kill. So Rengar's W itself hard counters Viego, but Rengar actually can duel you early, especially in the jungle. He can invade you early, and Rengar is an insane champion in 2v2 scenarios as well. Personally, Rengar has always been my mental counter. Recently, it's swapped over to Kindred, to be honest, but Rengar has always been one of those champs that I think in the right hands, Rengar's always out. I don't know if you guys know, but Rengar's always had a really insane win rate in high elo compared to low elo, because while people think that Rengar is not actually that difficult of a champion because he can one-shot, Rengar is actually one of the harder junglers in the game to play. So in the right hands, Rengar is an absolutely devastating champion, and I think is one of the more impossible matchups in the right hands. Now I will say that maybe in lower elo, Rengar is not so much of a problem, but if I were to see a Rengar in my game, I would be terrified, because any Rengar picked in higher rank is usually a pretty good one. So I fear Rengar, and I would put him towards the top. Alright, Viego, I'm gonna skip him because, you know, Viego versus Viego. I mean, I guess the greatest enemy to Viego is himself, just like, you know, we are all our own greatest enemy, but we'll leave him there. Set is not a jungler in my opinion. Shaco. How do I rate Shaco? If I were to rank these champions based on how annoying they are, I would probably put him at number 1. But yeah, I don't think Shaco's very good. I think AP Shaco's really easy to beat, mostly just annoying. Especially if they go AP Shaco, you can just build some MR or Merc Dreads, and it's no problem. AD Shaco's a little bit harder, but he's still not that difficult. I would say that he after his most recent buffs, I would say he's a little bit better than Shaco or than Kha'Zix and Kiana, but I would say that, yeah, I'd probably put Shaco still in the easy matchup, because there's a lot of different ways you can beat a Shaco. You outscale him, you can cheese him by invading his boxes, you can build Death's Dance or Maw to counter him, depending on whether he builds AD or AP. I don't think Shaco's that hard, but that is where I would put him. Now, Shyvana has actually been one of the strongest champions in general in the game for a long time. At this point, I would probably put her as the hardest of the hard matchups. I can't in good faith put her in impossible matchups, because she's not impossible to beat, mostly just because she is almost entirely useless before level 6.
He told me that Papa Smurf is real.
So she's almost entirely useless before level 6, which basically just gives you a window to always beat her. On top of the fact that you do actually outscale Shyvana at 3 or 4 items. If you can deny her dragons and counter her ganks as soon as she hits level 6, you can beat her. However, her power farming and tankiness and ability to scale into the mid game is just one of the most insane champions in the game. I'm sure you guys have experienced it. I would say that she is a hard matchup, but not an impossible one. Now, Skarner, he is actually a jungler, but I think he'll be the first actual jungler that I'll put in Freelo. I think that while Skarner himself is has elements to him that specifically counter Viego, like his ultimate or just the CC that he provides, he does not do nearly enough damage or have nearly enough skill, like win conditions versus Viego, to do anything besides just lose. I don't think that I've had difficulty versus Skarner, like ever. However, you know, my good friend Badid is very adamant on the fact that Skarner is stronger than I think he is. So, you know, if he ever wants to prove me wrong, you know, he can meet me in solo queue. But I'm pretty sure that Skarner is just one of the worst champions in the game for solo queue specifically. So I don't think Skarner is very good. So I will put him down there. I don't think Sylas is a jungle, so I'll put him in Freelo. However, I will say that I wish Sylas was a jungle, because I played Sylas back in the day when he was a jungler, and it was like Viego 1.0, and as a Viego main now, I do kind of miss the ability to play Sylas, because I love that champion. I wish he was a jungler. Riot, please buff him in the jungle, although I know you never will, but, you know, that's fine. Alright, Taliyah. Taliyah is a hard matchup because Taliyah is one of those champs that is very, very difficult for you to get onto. She can outrange you, and with her E, basically with Taliyah's rework, her E made her one of the hardest champions in the game for Viego to play against. However, if you are able to find a way to get onto Taliyah, she can't do anything against you. The Taliyah has to play perfectly in order to beat you. However, well, I wouldn't say she has to play perfectly. She has to play relatively well in order to beat you. And good Taliyahs won't give you the ability to get on her super easily. So I think Taliyah is definitely a hard matchup. Not an impossible one because, like I said, she has to play well in order to beat you. But her E and the distance she's able to keep against you as Viego makes the game very, very tough for you. Now, Trundle, I would say, is an impossible matchup. Trundle will just always beat Viego because Trundle pretty much beats any champion in a 1v1. Trundle has probably the best 1v1 of any jungler in the early game. Maybe Volleyball is a little bit better. But yeah, no champion can really beat Trundle in a 1v1 early, and at level 6, no champion can beat Trundle in a 1v1 at all, pretty much. Especially no melee champion. So Trundle just destroys your early game, and if he's good, he'll pressure you in your jungle, and he'll counter your ganks because he can, and because there's not much you can do about it. And then in late game fights, even if Trundle's behind, let's say you build like Death Stance Maul, and you are going in for a backline dive, Trundle just turns around, presses R on you, you turn into Yumi out of attachment, and you're just dead. So Trundle has the ability to dominate your early game, and even if you do pull ahead of him and outscale him, he can still press R on you in a late game fight and make your life nearly impossible. So I will say that Trundle is probably he's probably the impossible matchup that people don't really consider a lot of, because people underestimate Trundle, but he is very, very strong versus Viego specifically. Alright, Tryndamere. Don't consider him a jungler, although he's a real son of a bitch to play against as Viego. Twitch, I don't really consider him a jungle. Now, Udir. Udir is the most underrated jungler in the game, 100%. I would say that he is probably on the exact same tier as Shyvana. Honestly, not sure which one to put higher. I think I'll put Shyvana higher, but they're basically the same tier of champion. Udir is incredibly fast, incredibly tanky, clears fast and clears healthy, and has the ability to invade and pressure you the entire game, and there's not much you can do about it. The main reason why Udir is not an impossible matchup is because Udir's team fighting is absolutely terrible, which is where Viego excels the most, is in team fights. So theoretically, when it comes down to if it comes down to a team fight scenario, Viego can pull ahead and actually beat Udir. Although Udir through the early and mid game should have full and complete control of Viego. A lot of people just feel like that Udir is extremely useless because he's a pretty archaic champion. But with his tanky build and his like Phoenix stance build, he is a champion that you just cannot underrate. And he will run over you if you do not give him his proper respect. So I think Udir is a hard matchup. Alright. Let's see. Vi. Now Vi is honestly just a pretty even matchup. She's pretty similar to Nocturne in the sense that they both have ults that make your life very difficult, as well as just lockdown CC. However, I do think that just like most junglers in the game, most junglers in the game don't actually scale that well. That's something that that you have to consider, is that most junglers don't actually have very good scaling. So Vi is one of those champs that does not have great scaling, whereas Viego does actually have good scaling. So even though Vi will give you a lot of problems early, her dueling is pretty strong, and her ganks post 6 are pretty strong, so she might be able to beat you early game. But Viego is a champion that can very easily outscale Vi. So anytime, as you probably have been able to tell by this point, anytime there's a champion that beats you early but you outscale, it's pretty close to an even matchup. That's usually how it goes. Now, Volibear. I would say Volibear is... Last patch, I would have considered Volibear to be maybe the hardest jungler besides Kindred to play against. I would say that he was an impossible matchup. But after he got some pretty significant nerfs this patch, which basically brought him from most broken champ in the game down to still a like top 10 worst jungler to play against as Viego. It kind of just shows, despite his huge nerfs, it kind of just shows how OP Volibear was before. So yeah, Volibear is probably the hardest of the hard matchups. I know I said that about Shyvana, but now that I'm thinking about it, it is Volibear. So I think Volibear is pretty problematic. He just destroys you early. His dive potential. It's not until the very, very end of the game that you outscale him. But in most cases, Volibear should be able to just get full control of you in the early game. He clears similar speed to you. His ganks are better. His dueling is better. His 1v1. Volibear is just an insane champion, especially early to mid. Alright, Warwick is a champion that I actually used to have him as a pretty impossible matchup because there's basically no way to 1v1 him. But lately, Warwick has just not been performing very well and is a relatively weak champion, plus is almost never seen in high elo. So I would say that he is probably around the same tier as Olaf. While it's true that you should never be able to 1v1 Warwick straight up, there's not actually much that... like, Warwick has a lot of problems as a champion. He's very one-dimensional, and because of the fact that he's almost never played in high-low, it's hard for me to realistically put him anywhere above even. But I think I have to keep him in even because he does have that one thing, which is that he can always beat Viego in a skirmish, and because of that, it's hard to put him anywhere lower or higher than just even. Wukong, I would say that Wukong is about here. Wukong did get a little bit nerfed, and the Divine Sunder change doesn't do great for Wukong, but he is still a champion that is a top 5 to 10 jungler in the game, and versus Viego, that is no exception. He's just very, very strong. The invisibility is crazy, and he is a champ that can definitely match your team fighting potential in mid to late game team fights. So Wukong is a hard matchup, but not as bad as he was last patch. Xinjiang, I think that Xinjiang is actually, unironically, probably one of the easiest junglers in the game to beat. He's a champion that needs to win early game, but even in the early game, I'm pretty sure that that Viego can beat him. So if Xinjiang can't win in the early game, then there's really nothing he can do at all. I think Viego is actually one of Xinjiang's biggest counters, like actual straight up counters. So no surprise that that Xinjiang would be in Freelo here. Zach, the final champion on this tier list. I will actually put him in the exact same position as Nunu, Rammus, Zach. I feel like they're all pretty much in the same category. They're pretty much in the same category. They all are tanks that can dominate you early game and mid game if they get really far ahead, but you eventually outscale once you get your items. So they should have the ability to dominate you for the majority of the early game. However, like I said, you will eventually outscale them, and that is why I'm putting Zac, Rammus, and Nunu where I put them. I noticed that Sejuani isn't on here. Sejuani I would probably put somewhere in even, because I think she's a little bit easier to face than the other tanks. And Rek'Sai is another champion I don't see here. Rek'Sai I would probably put actually in hard. Rek'Sai dominates you early, very similarly to how like Volleyball kind of dominates you early. And while you do outscale Rek'Sai, Rek'Sai as a champion herself has the ability to snowball the game faster than most other champions, early game champions can. And her dueling, especially if she gets ahead of you, is incredibly strong. And let me think. There's one other champion. Oh yeah, Bel'Veth. So Bel'Veth, after her nurse, I think Bel'Veth is actually not that difficult. I think she's probably lower on even, if not easy. Bel'Veth's E is probably one of the most broken abilities ever, especially versus Viego. Her ability to reduce 70% of their damage or whatever they nerfed it to. However, her early game is absolutely terrible, and she's very exploitable. And even in late game fights, even after she's scaled, you can still very easily beat Bel'Veth. So I think after Bel'Veth's nurse, she's not super crazy. But besides that, I hope I was able to explain all of these correctly. This actually ended up being a longer video than I was hoping for, so hopefully I didn't ramble on too long. I wanted to give good opinions on every champion that I could. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope I explained things properly. I enjoy doing these videos, and they're usually received well by you guys. So if you want me to keep doing tier lists for every patch that comes out, giving you guys updates on where I would rank junglers on the current patch, like the video, comment, let me know what you guys want to see. Let me know that you guys are enjoying it, because I want to continue doing videos like this, but only if you guys want to see them. So thank you guys for watching. Hope you learned something. Hope this clears up all matchups for patch 12.13 for Viego. And yeah, have a good rest of your day, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.